Bruchim habayim, everyone. I guess we'll start at the. I think the Facebook Live is started, so we'll start. If anyone has any questions throughout, just let me know. And B'ezrat Hashem, we'll learn a little more today. Okay. So last week we kind of finished up on some halachot of squeezing different juices, different fruits into different foods, into liquids, and we're gonna continue now with that theme. It's gonna go into a little bit less of actually squeezing fruits and food, and we're gonna go into different kind of squeezing, as we'll see. It's kind of applicable, so it's kind of what do you want to say, coincidental, or you want to say hashkacha pratit, whatever you want to say, but we'll see it. Okay, so first, halakha, the act of milking an animal on Shabbat is a capital offense. Shabbat desecration, because this act is an act of meparek, which is a tolada of the melacha of dash, which means that you're basically separating the liquid from a solid thing. So, for example, like a milking a cow would be considered a capital offense, which means it's prohibited by the Torah. Our sages forbade the act of crushing snow or frost with a knife or spoon in order to cause water to melt from it. So we're not in Shabbat yet, but as we're getting closer to the Shabbat, and maybe if there's still snow, you wouldn't want to go out and try crushing snow in order to melt it for water. They feared that this might be confused. This might confuse someone into thinking that he could squeeze grapes as well, in that which we know from last week is forbidden by the Torah. It is permitted, however, to put snow or frost into a cup of water or wine and allow it to melt there, as we'll see. It is permissible to scatter salt or snow, salt onto the snow on Shabbat, even though this will cause the snow to melt. The melting of the snow is not considered the act of the person who is scattered. The melting of the snow is not considered the act of the person who scattered the salt. It's mainly a byproduct. So you're throwing the salt, and the salt is causing the snow to melt. Of course, this is all assuming that the person does not perform any act of forbidden labors on Shabbat to bring the salt there, such as carrying, which we know you would not be able to carry in a Reshut HaRabim. It is permissible to walk on snow or frost on Shabbat, even though friction of the footsteps melts the snow a bit, right? So even though when you step on the snow, it's going to cause the snow to melt a little bit. That's fine, since he does not walk with the intentions of melting the snow, and it is permitted, even though it will definitely be melted by being trampled on. This is a case of psik reisha b'derabanan delo nichale, which we said is a psik reisha is something that is inevitably going to happen. Meaning, so when he steps on the ice, it's for sure going to melt a little bit. And it's a derabanan because the whole idea of crushing ice is because we said that he might come to do crush the grapes, and it's the lo nichale. He didn't intend for it to happen because he's walking. Well, what is he doing when he's walking? He's going to shul or he's going to his house. So his intentions aren't for the snow to melt. It's for the for his walking, and so all those combine together to permit this act, and it would be allowed to therefore walk in the snow. Furthermore, the sages would not have forbidden an act that is impossible to avoid. Right? If you have to walk to shul or you have to walk back from shul on Shabbat, how else is he going to be able to do that? He's going to have to walk. And when you walk, now, like we said, it's going to cause the snow to melt. And even if, let's say, for example, your shoes have a logo or have words on the bottom of it, that when you stomp on the snow, it will cause those words or symbols to appear, that's still permissible. Again, because mainly, same thing if it's soft sand or soft soil, it's going to be allowed, mainly because he's not intending to do so. That's the idea here, is as long as your intention isn't to create those images or to create those pictures in the snow or in the mud, it will be allowed to walk. Plus, again, it's something that we all have to do. We have to walk either to shul or back from shul, and therefore it is permissible. Rain or snow is not muktzah, even if it fell on Shabbat. I guess the question here is, right, if something is created on Shabbat, it's considered nolad. It's something that's new, and we would say that it has the status of muktzah. The famous case that they always give is the chicken that laid the egg on Shabbat. That egg would be considered muktzah because it wasn't there before the Shabbat. But in this case, the rain or snow, it's permissible, because even if the sky was cloudless when Shabbat began, the rain or snow is permitted and not muktzah, because it's something that was already existing. Some poskim contended that it is forbidden to shovel snow from the path to one's doorway, even if it is an enclosed area by an eruv. They argued that this is forbidden because it is a strenuous activity, and because it is a weekday activity that causes people to look at you and be like, wait a second, are you really keeping the Shabbat? Because you're not in the spirit of Shabbat. Shoveling the snow may seem like it's not it's not in the spirit of the Shabbat. But the correct halacha, however, is it is permissible to shovel the snow on Shabbat. None of the reasons given to forbid it are valid. Why? Because we'll see that it could actually be very important for someone to shovel the snow in order for you to get into or out of the house or the Beit Knesset or the synagogue safely, especially if it's very icy, or people there's relatively old people that it makes it easier for them, and therefore it would be permissible. Furthermore, no one can argue that it should be forbidden for fearing that a person might straighten out or uneven spots of the walkway while shoveling the snow. Mainly because, again, the reason he's taking out the snow is not so that it could be even. He's taking out the snow so that people can walk easily and not be harmed. One may use a hatchet, a rake, or an axe to clear the snow. Even though these tools would normally be muktzah, these are in a category of muktzah shemenachto leisur, which means that usually the way to use these items, for example, a rake or an axe, is muktzah. So an axe, you can't cut a tree down on Shabbat. But if I need to use that axe or a rake for something other than what its intended purpose is, then I can, because that's going to be called letzorach gufo. I can using it for a purpose that isn't necessarily what it is used for. The famous case with that is using a hammer to break open a nut. So even though a hammer would seemingly be muktzah on Shabbat, if you needed to open up a nut, that is permissible. Same thing here, that a rake or an axe, even though those are muktzah normally on Shabbat, you would be able to clear the ice or the snow with them on Shabbat. As explained above, the snow is not muktzah and it may be moved from place to place. Furthermore, although it is forbidden to crush snow, it is permissible to shovel snow. So we said you're not allowed to crush snow because you want it to melt faster when you're crushing it. But in this case, we're not doing it because we're trying to melt it faster. We're doing it because we're moving it out of the way. We're shoveling the snow. Moving a shovel full of snow is not related to that prohibition at all. In fact, even if the snow was frozen into ice, it is permissible to break that ice and shovel it away. So again, the reason why we're breaking the ice or snow is important. If we're doing it so it'll melt faster, then that would be prohibited. But if we're doing it so we can be able to shovel it out of the path, that would be permitted. When snow becomes icy and slippery, people are liable to slip and fall as they walk on it. The situation becomes one of danger for the public, and even those poskim who rule that it is normally forbidden to shovel snow permitted in such a case. I know over here now we have a similar situation, even though it's not Shabbat. It can get dangerous, especially if you're having a lot of people come in and out of the house. You would want to make sure that the path is safe for people to go. Fine. Any questions before we move on? See? Looks good. Okay. Do I have a question here? Okay. Fine. Let's continue. Some poskim ruled that our sages did not forbid crushing snow or frost if it is inside a cup or bowl of water or wine, since the liquid melted from the snow is not noticeable. Other poskim ruled that it is also forbidden. In practice, we must refrain from crushing snow in a cup or even stirring it around to speed its melting into the liquid in the cup. So if I go outside and I take, let's say Shabbat, right? I take out my cup, I fill it up with ice. I'm not allowed to go and start, crushing it or trying to stir it to make it melt faster. That would be prohibited on Shabbat. It is permissible, however, to shake the cup containing the snow or frost to cause it to melt. So what I can do is I can kind of put my hand on top of the cup and shake it around, and do one of those things that the bartenders usually do, and that will cause it to, melt faster, and that's allowed. It is also permitted to place ice cubes on fruits to cool them off, although the ice will then melt. So what we said earlier about not wanting the ice to melt, that's if you want, let's say, the liquid out of them. But if you want the ice to melt because of a different purpose, for example, to cool down the fruits, then that would be permitted. It is forbidden to crush ice or stir it around to cause it to melt, just like snow or frost. It is permissible, however, to break a large chunk of ice into smaller pieces to insert them into cups of water or wine. So where you see this a lot, unfortunately, is sometimes you forget a water bottle in the freezer. And when the water bottle's in the freezer, it gets frozen, and you got that big chunk of ice now, right? So sometimes you can take maybe a knife and you want to try crushing the ice, or you maybe it starts to melt a little bit, and you start stirring it so that the ice will start melt, the liquid that melted will start melting the ice faster. This would be forbidden on Shabbat. Again, when you're with ice or with snow or with frost or whatever it is, we cannot crush it or stir it to make it melt faster, because that's going to look like we're kind of squeezing the ice or the snow for the liquid, and that might lead to someone to squeeze a grape, and at that point it would not be permitted; it would be forbidden. So it's a fine line. Even though we'll see now in a second that when you place ice cubes into water or into a drink, it would be allowed to be stirred or mixed. Let's say you're drinking hot Coca-Cola, right, or warm, room temperature, and you want to cool it down with some ice cubes. You can put the ice cubes in and stir it, because over there you're not melting the ice for the water. You're melting the ice to cool down the Coca-Cola. Fine. It is permissible to pour a bit of water on an ice cube tray to facilitate removing the cubes from it. So sometimes when you're bringing the ice cube tray and you're trying to take the ice out and it's not coming out, you can pour a little bit of water to melt it a little bit so that it can come out. Again, this isn't considered squeezing. The issue is going from ice to water, not water to water. In this case, we're just using the water to dislodge the ice cubes from the tray, and that would be permitted. It is permissible to place ice cubes or pieces of snow or frost into a cup of wine or water and allow them to melt. Our sages do not forbid this, since no action is taken to melt the snow or ice. It is likewise permissible to place ice cubes in an empty water bottle, in an empty bottle, in the sun or near a fire to allow them to melt. One may afterwards drink that water. It does not become muktzah as nolad, something newly created. So again, what we said when you're trying to make the ice or the snow into water, it's only an issue if you're crushing or stirring it. But if you're putting it into a cup, let's say, and then you put it outside in the sunlight, that's allowed. So let's say you had that frozen water bottle. You're allowed to put that into the sunlight or next to, let's say, the stove or the plata, and that would be allowed to cause it to melt. And the water that comes from it is not nolad because, again, it's not something created new. The water was just there, just in a different form. In the winter, one must take care not to wash hands with water that is mixed with snow or frost. If one has no other choice, one may wash with such hands with such water, but one must take care not to crush the snow or frost with one's hands. So I guess over here, we're not going to have that problem. I don't think any of us has water that is mixed with snow or frost. But I guess back in the day when they went to the well to bring the water to do netilat yadayim, maybe it had some frost or some snow on it. And so now when they're doing netilat yadayim, when they dry their hands, they might be crushing the snow or frost that was left on their hands. And so that's going to be an issue. So we would venture to say that you should try to stay away from using that kind of water. Again, if you have no other option, you're in Siberia or whatever it is, and that's the only water that you have, then that's of course preferable. You just have to make sure that you're not crushing any ice or any frost. If the surface of the water in the mikveh has frozen over, it is permissible to break the ice in order to immerse in the waters. So I don't know if we're going to have that issue here, Baruch Hashem. But in some of the tzaddikim, especially and you hear stories in Siberia, Poland, when it was winter and it was freezing, they would go to the mikveh. They would break the top of the ice in order for them to be able to go into the mikveh. And, especially the woman also would give up their bodies in order to immerse in the waters so they can become tahor, they can become pure for their husbands. And this was of course seen as a big zchut, as a big merit. The halacha is that you're allowed to break the ice. Again, we say you can't crush ice, but that's only if you're trying to make it into water. Over here, when we're crushing the ice, we're only doing that in order to get to the water inside, so we can go to the mikvah. The same applies to a well containing water. One may break the ice on its surface in order to draw the water. This is assuming that there is no issue of carrying when drawing water from the well. One may even break the ice on the surface of a river or an artesian well. Even though the water is connected to the ground, breaking the ice is not an act of the melacha of boneh vesoter, building or tearing down. The ice is considered to be water, and one may break the ice whenever one needs the water for Shabbat. So, in this case, when he has the well, and he needs the water in the well, he can break open the ice in order to get the water. Okay? Any questions up until now? Check again. Okay. Everything looks good. Fine. We'll continue. If someone places a pot of food to be warmed up on Shabbat, and there's a layer of congealed fat on top of the gravy in the pot that will melt in the heat, one may eat the food, including the gravy. It is permissible to warm up such a pot of food, even if one knows that this will happen. This cannot be compared to crushing snow or frost, which our sages forbade, since no action is taken to melt the fat. It's simply melted by the heat. So we see that sometimes there's like a layer of congealed fat on, maybe it's not even a pot of food, and maybe it's the meat or whatever it is, and when we heat it up, it turns into liquid. So you might think, okay, this is a case of a solid going from a liquid, and maybe it might be prohibited by our sages. We see, no, it's not prohibited by our sages, it's permitted because we're not doing anything to cause it to melt. It's kind of like throwing the ice onto the snow to cause it to melt, the salt on the snow in order for it to melt. Again, you're not causing the snow to melt. You're not directly causing the snow to melt. You're indirectly causing the snow to melt. Same thing here. You're indirectly causing the congealed fat to melt. The common custom is to permit the act of stirring sugar in a cup of water with a spoon so that it will dissolve into the water. Although we do not permit this identical act concerning ice, we do permit it with sugar. So sugar, you're allowed to take it, and you can mix it into the water so it'll be sweeter. Again, if this was a different drink, for example, like let's say coffee or something, we're a little bit more lenient over there because it doesn't seem like it's being it's being absorbed into the liquid, but it looks like it's a liquid that is made for that. Water is a special case because, especially with ice and sugar, it looks like you're doing it for the water. Like for example, the ice, you're making it melt for the water. You're making the sugar dissolve for the water. But of course, the sugar is allowed. The ice would not be allowed. So you can't take a cup of ice and kind of mix it faster so that the ice will melt. It is certainly permissible to pour scalding hot tea onto sugar in a cup, even directly from a kli rishon, causing it to dissolve instantly. This does not infringe upon the restriction against cooking on Shabbat, since sugar is a cooked product, and there is no prohibition against cooking a solid food on Shabbat that has already been cooked. We've already talked about this, that there's no bishul achar bishul. So if you take from a kli rishon water, let's say tea or coffee, whatever it is, and you pour it into a cup that has sugar in it, that is fine. You might say that you're cooking the sugar. Nope, we said that there's no cooking after cooking, and the sugar has already been cooked. As explained above, we talked about it back in cooking, that it is permissible to soak dried raisins or peaches in water on Shabbat to make flavored beverages to drink that same day. This does not infringe upon the rule against pickling fruits on Shabbat, nor does it have anything to do with schita, squeezing. Okay. It is permissible on Shabbat to soak grapes in a barrel of wine to induce them to split open and release their juices into the wine. Although there are poskim who rule that it is forbidden, it is permitted. Again, why? Because you're not directly causing this to happen. It's a byproduct of what you have done, and therefore, in this case, it would be permitted. It is permissible to wipe an infant's skin clean with moist towelettes. If the towelettes are attached to one another, one must separate them before Shabbat, so that he is not liable for Shabbat use. Sometimes you'll see that some of the wipes, they're like connected a little bit, and so you would want to make sure that those are all completely detached before Shabbat begins. It is best to use the towelettes on the top of the package, since they are liable to be less moist and are less likely to squeeze any liquid from them. Before using such towelettes, it is important to ascertain that they are indeed a paper product and not a cloth, because if they are cloth, if you push down too hard, you can come to release some of the liquid inside of them, and it would be forbidden as schita. Majority of the towelettes or the baby wipes today aren't really made out of cloth, and so there's not much to worry about there. The thing you want to make sure is just make sure that even then you're squeezing them and you're not wiping them too hard, because that can be you can be liable for squeezing out some of the liquid. There is a halachic basis to permit the act of wetting toilet paper and using it to wipe one's skin clean on Shabbat. So technically, according to the halacha, you can take the toilet paper and you can wet it a little bit. Okay, you don't want to wet it too much, because once you wet it too much, then for sure you're going to come to squeezing some of the water out, and that would be an issue of schita, of squeezing. Okay, now we're going to move on to cutting, to grinding. So this is going to be the melacha of tochen. Tochen is basically grinding, which we come out to say is also cutting. And we'll see all the halachot now with that. I guess before I go on, any questions? Okay. Okay, we'll continue. A Jew who milks kagegoret, which is 1/3 the volume of an egg. So if an egg is around like 51 grams, we're going to say it's around what, 27, something, about 17, right? 17. So 17 grams of wheat or barley commits a capital punishment offense of Shabbat desecration. So if someone grinds 17 grams of wheat or barley, that is the minimum requirement to be over, to have committed the prohibition of tochen. The same applies to one who mills spices with a spice mill. Another application of this melacha is to saw wood for the sake of creating sawdust or shavings, or to file a bar of metal in order to use the shavings as metalsmith. Again, nowadays we don't really do tochen. We do a lot of it as the byproduct of the tolada of tochen, which we're going to see is cutting. Likewise, one who chops wood into small pieces, or one who crumbles solid earth into loose soil, is guilty of an act of melacha of tochen. It is forbidden to grind coffee beans in a coffee mill, and certainly to grind them in an electric mill operating on Shabbat with a timer, right? Even though that it's on Shabbat with a timer, you're still not allowed to use it because it's still tochen. Some poskim ruled that this is a capital offense of performing the melacha of tochen, but others maintained that the grinding coffee beans in a coffee mill is prohibited only by our sages. At the end of the day, like what we said last week, that if it's prohibited by our sages or prohibited by the Torah, there's no real difference, because the lashes that they used to give for the rabbinical prohibitions and the lashes that they gave for the Torah prohibitions were the same lashes, and they hurt the same. Some poskim rule that someone who chops the vegetables into small pieces is guilty of performing an act that is a tolada of the melacha of tochen. Most poskim, however, rule that one is guilty only when one chops a type of vegetable that is inedible unless it is chopped and prepared for cooking. It is permissible, accordingly to these poskim, to chop salad vegetables or fruit or bread into tiny pieces. In practice, we follow the first, more stringent opinion, since the issue involves a Torah prohibition. And usually when it comes to a Torah prohibition, we most of the time rule more stringently. This is an issue, however, only if one plans to eat the salad later during the day. But if one plans to eat it immediately, it is permissible according to all poskim. Likewise, one may chop vegetables for the salad just before a meal, even if the salad will be eaten at the end of the meal. So similar to borer, when we talked about borer, one of the requirements for borer is that it has to be the good from the bad, and that it has to be done relatively immediately. It also has to be done with one's hand or an extension of one's hand. And in this case, we're going to say that he would have to do it close to the meal. And we'll see what that means in a second. Accordingly, it is permissible to chop tomatoes, cucumbers, lettuce, and the like for a salad into very small pieces, whether for oneself or for someone else, as long as it is to be eaten immediately afterwards. Some people follow a stringency to chop the vegetables to pieces that are slightly larger than they would usually cut it during the weekday. Technically, this is not necessary, but one who follows this stringency will receive a special blessing in heaven. So again, he doesn't have to change the way he cuts on Shabbat than during the week, as long as he's doing it for the sake of eating it now. But if he does, he will be blessed. So we said immediately. What constitutes as immediately? If someone is having the salad at a meal, then he may prepare the salad at the beginning of the meal, even if he's not going to eat it for another several hours within that same meal. So sometimes, you come to a meal, and then they do the first course, the bread, and they have schmoozing, they talk, questions, this and that, and then they bring the fish, whatever it is, and until they get to the main course, which happens to be that salad, it could be an hour, 2 hours. Even then, he may do it right before the meal because the meal is considered one whole entity. So if he does it at the beginning of the meal, he chops it at the beginning of the meal, it's as if he did it immediately. Therefore, one must take care not to start preparing the salad for the Shabbat morning meal until the men have arrived home from the synagogue and they are ready to begin the meal. So that should be the last thing that we really do. Is right before we start Kiddush and start the meal, is we should make the salads. And that's why you'll see a lot of the women who know much more than us, they will wait until we get home, and then they cut the salad. And then, unfortunately, some men, they get mad. They come home hungry, and they say, why didn't you do this beforehand? Now we know why they didn't do it beforehand, because they weren't allowed to do it beforehand. Okay. It is permissible to chop vegetables on a wooden cutting board, even though the knife scratches the board. One may use a cutting board fashioned particularly for this purpose, as long as one plans to eat the salad immediately afterwards. If someone did not follow the halacha as ruled by the Shulchan Aruch, and he chopped the vegetables for a salad that he's going to eat maybe an hour or 2 hours later, the vegetables may nevertheless be eaten on Shabbat, since there are poskim who ruled that this act is permitted. If a salad was prepared for a meal, and after the meal some of the salad is left over, the remainder may be eaten later on Shabbat day. As mentioned above, even if the salad was prepared purposely for consumption later in that day, we allow the salad to be eaten. It's kind of like what we said with borer, right? If someone did borer for the meal and happens to be that there's left over, he can eat it even later on in that day. Certainly in this case, where the salad was prepared accordingly to the halakha with the correct intentions, it is permitted. One must beware, however, not to prepare a salad that is certainly larger than one need for this meal, so that there will be left over for later on. Some people might, take advantage of this rule and be like, okay, I'm going to make a very big salad. I'm going to make it for this meal. What's the problem? But in the back of your mind that you're doing it also for maybe Suda Shlishit, which is later on in that day. So as long as you're doing it for this meal and this meal only, then it is allowed. But if you're going to do it for another meal later on in that day, it would not be allowed to be eaten at that second meal. Okay? It is permissible to mash a banana with the tines of a fork to prepare it for an infant. So you can smash the smash the banana just as one does on the weekday. As long as one plans to feed it to the infant immediately, right? Again, you can't mash the banana, let's say at 7 o'clock in the morning, for the baby to eat it at 10 o'clock in the morning. And it would have to be, you may mash it at 7 o'clock so that the baby can eat it at 7:05, right? It is permissible to crumble bread on Shabbat to feed chickens or for some other purpose, since the wheat had already been ground into flour to make the bread, there is no prohibition against grinding a substance that has already been milled, right? Since the flour has already been kneaded and grinded and everything. There's no right now. What you're doing is crumbling is not really anything of grinding. You're just crumbling it. Therefore, it is permissible. It is forbidden to chop vegetables to feed chickens on Shabbat. It is permissible. It is possible to permit it only if one intends to feed them immediately afterwards. It is permissible to cut boiled or roasted meat into small pieces with a knife, even if one does not plan to eat it until later on in that day. Many poskim rule that the melacha of tochen applies only to things that grow from the ground, and other poskim rule that the melacha of tochen does not apply to foods that are readily edible without being ground. Combining these opinions, we have a strong basis to permit cutting meat into small pieces. Therefore, if someone cannot chew a large piece of meat, but is able to handle it once it is cut into small pieces, this may be done. So if you want to cut, the chicken nuggets or whatever, the schnitzel into small pieces, or the meat into small pieces so your children can eat or you can eat it, that would be permissible. For the same reason, it is permissible to cut cheese with a knife into small pieces or to mash it with a fork, even if one plans to eat it only on later on in that day. Cheese is not considered a product that grows from the ground, and therefore melacha of tochen does not apply to it. So no problem with cutting cheese or kind of smashing it. Our sages taught that one who makes cheese is guilty of performing an act of boneh, building. Even so, cutting cheese into small pieces is not considered soter, because soter applies only for someone who is destroying a structure in order to build another one there. But when you're cutting cheese, you're not building anything there, and so it would be allowed. With that being said, though, it is forbidden, however, to grate cheese with a cheese grater, even if one plans to eat the cheese immediately. Our sages forbade the act of grating with a tool made specifically for that purpose, since it appears to be a weekday activity. It seems the same thing would be, for example, let's say a salad cutter that would cut it into small pieces. That would also be forbidden. It is likewise forbidden to grate vegetables with a grater on Shabbat, even if one plans to eat them immediately afterwards. These things are called uvd dechol. It's a weekday a weekday tool, and using it is not in the spirit of Shabbat. It wouldn't be proper to use that on Shabbat. Although we said just this, it is permissible, however, to peel fruits and vegetables with a peeler. So you can use a vegetable peel. Let's say you're peeling carrots or whatever it is, and you want to use a vegetable peeler. That is allowed. It is likewise permissible to use an egg slicer on Shabbat. One of those fancy slicers that cuts the eggs. That would be allowed. It is permissible to crush peppercorn on Shabbat. One must not use a mortar and pestle, however. Those little things that they would use to crush, medicines back then. That's mainly because of mavit ayin. Someone who sees that might think it's allowed, and then they would go do it at home. Instead, one should crush them with the handle of a knife in a bowl. Employing this method is considered different in two ways from the normal method. One would usually do it on the weekday, and it is therefore permitted. Okay. Any questions up until now? We're almost done with this section. It is forbidden to crush walnuts and dates together to form a mush, even if one plans to eat it immediately afterwards. If it is necessary for someone elderly or for a little child or for someone ill, it may be done in a manner different than that you would use on the weekday. So, for example, it may be crushed with the handle of a knife or the handle of a pestle. Even when crushed in this manner, it is permissible only if one plans to serve the food immediately afterwards, because these foods are usually not. These foods are not crushed and mushed, we would be a little bit more stringent on them, and only in the case of need and in a shinoi in a different way are we going to allow it. It is forbidden to crush salt with wood, metal, or stone pestle, but one may do so with the handle of a knife in a bowl, so that one employs a method different than during the weekday in two aspects, as explained above. One may also crumble it with one's fingers. These restrictions apply to coarse salt only. Fine table salt that has conglomerated into large chunks may be chopped fine with a knife on Shabbat for the same reason. It is forbidden, however, to use a mortar and pestle to crush salt. These same rules apply to crushing sugar as well. So using main thing when you take sugar, I guess, or when you take salt, nowadays our salt is not real coarse. It's more fine. So you can take your hand and sprinkle it, or you can take whatever it needs. Same thing with sugar. If a container of snuff has dried out and has become a solid lump or lumps, it is permissible to crumble the lumps with one's fingertips, since it has already become, it was already ground before. If a garment has become soiled with mud, it is permissible on Shabbat to rub off the mud, even though this causes the dried mud to crumble into sand. This is not considered a melacha of tochen. It is permissible to rub the garment onto itself from the inside only, so that the mud will fall off. It is forbidden to rub the mud off from the outside, because that will be appearing as laundering. So let's say you get like a little smudge on the shirt, you can't start going, like that. That would be considered laundering. But from the inside, you can kind of like rub it off. That would be permissible. It is permissible to crush dried flowers or myrtle leaves in one's fingertips in order to smell their fragrance immediately afterwards, just like one may chop foods in order to eat them immediately afterwards. There are poskim who rule that this is forbidden, but those who are lenient have a halachic basis to rely upon. So you'll see sometimes at the Beit Knesset, they'll have these plants that you can come and say a bracha on and smell, because you want to make sure you get at least 100 brachot on Shabbat, just like any other day of the week. And so sometimes you have to get out the smell. How do you get out the smell? You kind of crush the plant a little bit to release that smell, and that it would be allowed on Shabbat, as long as you're not pulling out any leaves or anything. It is permissible to crush fragrant peppercorns wrapped in a cloth. This does not infringe upon the prohibition against applying a fragrance to a garment, since this is forbidden only by our sages, and it is not his intentions to apply any fragrance to the clothes. It is permitted, even though it is a psik resha, inevitably that it will happen. Okay, so that finishes up both tochen and schita and dash. We're going to end it off there today. I don't want to start something new just yet. And Mizrat Hashem, we'll continue next week, hopefully in person. It'll be, and we don't have to worry about crushing the snow with our feet on Shabbat. Hopefully everything will be melted by then. Any questions before we call it a day?
I had one question about the salt.
Yes.
We're saying, so like regular table salt that gets clumped, you're fine breaking apart with your fingers. Can you also do that with like a spoon or a knife? Or?
Yes.
Okay, great. And then I missed it. Did you say you can or you can't break apart a clump of ice cubes on Shabbat to put into a drink?
Yes, you can. So the whole problem with ice on Shabbat is you can't cause the ice to melt for the water, because then it looks like you're kind of squeezing the ice or the snow to turn it into water. But to get the ice itself, that would be permitted.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Good questions, though. Any other questions?
No, y'all. Thank you.
Thank you guys. I know it's tough, especially with the weather too. But they say the Torah is the fire. So Baruch Hashem, we're gonna cause some of this snow to melt with our Torah tonight. Okay. Mitzvah Hashem, I'll see everyone next week.
Amen.
Bye.
Have a good night.
Have a great night, guys. Stay warm, stay safe.
Shalom.